This is a demonstration of the Part 1 project application for a distributed generation project. Once there is a completed disclosure form, that disclosure form becomes eligible to be converted to a project application. To create a project application, you will first open the vendor menu, followed by the project application menu. For this example, I will select Create DG in order to create a distributed generation project application. When I select Create DG, I will be provided with a list of completed disclosure forms from which I will need to select the form that I would like to proceed with. I can click anywhere on that line to select a form and then choose Start Application, which will open a new project application. From the application screen, I can now view the project name, project ID, disclosure form ID, vendor ID, and vendor name. I will also see a link to the 6 project application sections. You do not need to complete these project application sections in order. However, I would recommend that approach whenever possible. So I will get started by selecting section 1, project location, in order to open up that section, which will be pre-populated with the property owner and the disclosure form from the disclosure form as well as the address. I do have the option to change the name of the property owner here if necessary, or provide latitude, longitude coordinates, or the parcel number. These items are good to include if you know that the property is difficult to locate, such as a new construction project. I have no changes to make here, so I will select Save and Continue, which will bring me to Section 2, Project Details. I will first select the project type. The next is financing structure, which is customer owned and has automatically populated from the disclosure form. I will indicate if I've already completed a project application on the same parcel of land, which would typically mean the project is co-located with another project. In this case, the answer is no. However, if the answer were yes, I would be prompted to provide the corresponding application ID of the co-located project. Similarly, in the next question, is this an expansion of an existing facility? The answer here is no. However, if I did select yes, I would again be prompted to enter the application ID of the existing facility. Next, I will indicate whether the project is located on public school-owned land, to which I will say no. Next, I will select the project category. So the project is 100 kilowatts AC, which would be a large DG project. However, in this example, we are going to select EEC as the main project type. There are a few reminders about selecting EEC as the project type, so it's important to remember that only EEC certified approved vendors may select the EEC category option. You will also need to further select a project category within EEC. So in this case, we are selecting a large DG EEC project as the project is 100 kilowatts. Next, I'll indicate if I would like to request an advance of capital for this project. This is only an option if the project category selection is EEC and will not appear if any other category is chosen. If I select yes, I will have an additional question, which is, do you plan on using the advance of capital to pay your collateral? To the right, there is additional information on the advance of capital, as well as a link to more details on the advance of capital evaluation criteria. So now that this section is complete, I will choose Save and Continue, which brings me to Section 3, Owner and Installer Information. Similar to the disclosure form, I have the option to type in the information as well as use the pre-populated approved vendor information and also the property location information. In this case, I will select to use the property location information. And next, I will indicate if the installer is known at this time. If I select yes, I will be required to provide the installer information. However, if I do not know the installer, I may select no, and I will not be required to provide this information until the Part 2 project application. In this case, I do know the installer. So I will select yes, and then go ahead and use the vendor information. I will need to indicate if the installer has received Distributed Generation ICC certification. If I select no, I will be unable to proceed as the installer must be ICC certified. So I will go ahead and select yes. And I will then enter the number of graduates of job training programs intended to work on this project. This is not a required field, so if you do not know this information at this time, you may leave it blank. But from here, I will select Save and Continue, which will bring me to Section 4, System Details and Performance. The first field is kilowatts DC, so you will see that I'm unable to enter information here. This field will be automatically calculated later on in this section when I enter the array details information. So for now, I will just skip this field. However, I did want to note that I'm able to see the sizes that I provided on the disclosure form over here on the right for reference. The next field is the total inverter size or the total kilowatts AC size of the project. If there are multiple inverters used, this would be the total of all inverters. In this case, my project size is 100 kilowatts AC because I'm using two 50 kilowatt inverters. I'm also able to reference the AC size from my disclosure form to the right of the field. It's also important to note that the inverter size is measured in continuous AC output of the inverter. So next I will enter the inverter efficiency percent, which defaults to 96, and then the ground cover ratio, which defaults to 0.4. I will then indicate if the system meets the minimal shading criteria, and in this case, there are no shading obstructions, so I will select yes. I will then indicate if the system has battery backup. I will now enter the array orientations. I need to have at least one array entered, and I can enter a maximum of 10. To add an array, I will select the Add button with the blue plus sign. For this example, the modules are 345 watts, and there are 347 modules with a tilt of 30 degrees and an azimuth of 180. The system is ground mounted and the tracking type is fixed mount open rack, and these are not bifacial arrays. I will now select Save, and now we can see that the DC capacity at the top of the screen has been auto-populated. So if no other changes are needed, I will select Save and Continue, which will bring us to Section 5, which is the REC estimate. I will need to choose the REC estimate methodology as either PV watts or by choosing my own custom capacity factor. In this case, I will choose custom capacity factor. And if I do choose this option, I will need to provide an explanation of how this value was calculated. So I will first enter the custom capacity factor and then provide details on the calculation. I will then select Calculate, and I should receive a notification that my REC values were successfully calculated. When I select Calculate on this custom capacity factor, it will automatically calculate the PV watts capacity factor as well in order to compare the REC outputs of the two options, which is reflected in the Compare Custom Estimate Amount to PV Watts Estimate field. If this field has a differential of greater than 20%, an additional attestation will be required that acknowledges the difference. So from here, I will go ahead and select Save and Continue, which brings me to Section 6, which is the interconnection details. I will first select the interconnecting utility from the drop-down list. Next, I will indicate whether the project was completed on or before September 15th, 2021. Then I will need to provide the final interconnection approval date. If the project is not yet interconnected, you should provide your best estimate of when you believe it may become interconnected. Then I will need to provide an explanation if the utility account holder and the property owner differ. One example that we may use here is if the utility account holder is the company president. If the utility account holder and the property owner are the same, no explanation needs to be entered. I will then enter the inverter details. This is especially helpful if there is more than one inverter being used. So here I will enter that we are using two 50 kilowatt solar edge inverters. You may also enter the rec tracking system here in the next field if your system is already online, but this field is not required, so you may leave it blank and provide it during the Part 2 application. So I will now select Save and Continue. So now you see we have a green check mark for each section, which means we have completed each section. Next, we can leave any additional comments in this comment box for the application review team. If there is information that you think would be helpful for the review team in order to avoid a request for additional information later on, please do so. So I will now upload the required documents by selecting the blue Documents button. And for this application, I am required to upload a proof of site control, a plot diagram or sitemap, a signed interconnection agreement, and a request for advance of capital narrative. So I will browse and upload a document for each of these sections. And I'm now complete with my document upload, so I will select Go Back, which brings me to my required attestations. So I need to attest that I read and understand the notice regarding prevailing wage compliance and the construction of this project by checking this box. Your required attestations will vary depending on the type of application you are submitting. So I'm now ready to submit the project application by selecting the big blue Submit Project Application button. I will receive notice that the project has been completed successfully, but that it is not fully submitted until it is batched. So in order to move forward and have this application reviewed by the program administration team, we will need to create, submit, and pay the application fee.